never kept it a secret that the GameCube, and by extension the Wii, is one of my favorite consoles. Winter of 2001 was certainly and will always be a special one for me. Well, now as of this video in November of 2021, we have reached the 20th anniversary, and holy I'm old. But let's take a little step back. The Nintendo 64 would come far behind first place against the PlayStation, but was a solid second over the Sega Saturn, being an in-demand system at launch with big hit games under its belt that was enough to create a legacy. But by the time we reached 1998, Nintendo would start looking to correct the mistakes of the Nintendo 64 that kept it from truly being a commercial success. Working with some of the same team that helped develop the graphics processor for the Nintendo 64, now operating under the company ArtX, Nintendo would publicly announce Project Dolphin in 1999. By 2000, ArtX had been acquired by ATI, though the design had already been mostly finalized. Still, the prestige of ATI being involved with the GameCube helped set it apart in this phase of development, as people waited to learn more about what would be coming next. It's weird looking back and trying to form a timeline for E3 2000. As some tend to remember there being big announcements for the GameCube, but those actually wouldn't come until later. In reality, Nintendo didn't have much to say about the Project Dolphin or Game Boy Advance in May of 2000. That was considered a relatively quiet E3 for Nintendo, even though they gave people a glimpse at what would be some of the swan songs from the Nintendo 64, such as Perfect Dark, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Paper Mario, and Majora's Mask. But people were hungry for the news about the system announced 1 year ago. Even though they didn't know it, they saw 2 games for it with Dinosaur Planet and Eternal Darkness. Both would shortly leave Nintendo 64 development and shift to Project Dolphin. Luckily, they didn't need to wait long, as Spaceworld 2000 would happen in August, and the first significant teaser for the GameCube would wow the audience in Japan. It might be just me, but that trailer still feels mind-blowing, even all these years later. It's intense with that first glimpse of Metroid Prime, Luigi's Mansion, Rogue Leader, and another Perfect Dark, and even that Legend of Zelda tech demo that people wouldn't let go of for the next 6 years or so. Of course, Spaceworld would include more for the Nintendo 64, such as Animal Force, that would be coming out in Japan, and some more info about the Game Boy Advance, and even games for the Game Boy Color. Press about Nintendo was buzzing. Project Dolphin, now called the GameCube, was on everyone's mind as the launch dates of late 2001 were fast approaching. Finally, at E3 2001, the world will get a full rundown of the Nintendo GameCube, and we get a true glimpse of its launch lineup and capability.
One that blends power and agility with a singular purpose. You base everything you do on the art of the developer and your true knowledge of the players.
Built on that GPU developed by ArtX and then ATI, it was paired with a PowerPC-based CPU from IBM. The GameCube would also adopt a proprietary mini DVD format that would hold 1.5 gigabytes, finally having Nintendo move away from cartridges. I won't get too much into the nerdy details like I'm quoting the Wikipedia article, but still early on it was pretty obvious its capabilities might outshine the PlayStation 2 that launched before it. The Dreamcast was only 1 year away from being pulled from shelves entirely, so the next big question was the new player, the Xbox. But despite some excellent graphical capabilities and originally a strong showing of launch titles, the GameCube did have some knocks against it out of the gate. While many applauded the move to disc-based media, the 1.5 gigabyte disc was much smaller than standard DVDs, which meant larger games would need to be split or compressed more or even downgraded. That size also meant it couldn't play DVDs, something the PlayStation 2 was winning at an incredible rate with. It was also planned to launch without a Super Mario game, almost like they were subbing Luigi's Mansion instead. That, compounded with some of those more vital launch titles being delayed, I think, started a smidge of doom and gloom. There was also some distaste for the design of the console. With the handle on the back and the indigo color at the front of advertising, the boring sticks in the mud, critics felt like it was leaning too much into a kid's toy. While the purple they went with has never been my choice, I think the design is very modern, compact, yet makes a statement. Easily one of the best controllers ever created as well. Of course, we now know about the unusual component out from the second digital port with complex cables to reproduce, but at the time, it wasn't an issue. Most people were okay with composite out and 480i on our CRT. But at least the option for 480p was there, and the games that supported it looked great. The GameCube would finally launch in Japan on September 14th, 2001 and November 18th in the US. Unfortunately, everywhere else had to wait until at least May 2002. Despite some reservations on design choices, the GameCube came out swinging for both of the initial launches. Graphically, it was terrific, and even with a scaled-down lineup and a lack of a Mario title, it sold well due to the $200 price tag, which was cheaper than the competition. There was a large selection of games that hit the shelves into the holiday season within that initial launch window: Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race Blue Storm, Pikmin, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Rogue Leader, and Super Monkey Ball, to name a few. Let's look at some of those titles and see what the GameCube had and still has to offer. Luigi's Mansion was the big one since it essentially took the place of the usual Mario title. Plus, it had a unique concept and starred Luigi, who had mostly been out of the sidelines since the 80s. I love Luigi's Mansion, and honestly, this first entry might still be my favorite of the series, thanks to, in my opinion, how tailored this game feels, and even with a few issues, it's still always fun to play. Though I'm sure my love for it is slightly skewed since it's Ghostbusters with Luigi, and up to that point was the most Ghostbusters of any Ghostbusters game. Luigi finds himself in trouble when he arrives at a mansion he won in a contest that he did not enter, and it turns out to be haunted. He runs into Professor Egad trying his best to capture a ghost. He finds out the mansion has only recently appeared, that a bunch of ghosts escaped from his collection, and that Mario arrived previously and never came back out. So the professor uses Luigi's appearance to his advantage and has him throw on the poltergust, that giant vacuum on his back, and get in the mansion to suck up every ghost he finds. Along the way, Luigi will also need to face against a few bigger baddies referred to as portrait ghosts. These were part of Egad's collection. When he catches ghosts, he runs them through the portrification unit, turning these spooky spirits into beautiful paintings. There are, of course, the usual boos as well. There had to be, with rumors that they are behind the release of all the portrait ghosts and the disappearance of Mario. Luigi's Mansion had this loop of catching a room of ghosts, grabbing a key, moving on to the next room, catching a portrait ghost, and eventually fighting a boss ghost. The smaller ghosts need to ironically be scared with the poltergust's flashlight, ghosts like it dark after all, and then sucked up once weakened. Once this happens, you must pull back on the joystick in the opposite direction to keep pulling the ghost in. Portrait ghosts, in contrast, need to be tricked into exposing their hearts so they can be sucked into the poltergust. This can be as simple as not looking directly at them, or you may have a little mini fight to wear them out. There is almost always some puzzle element to it. The boos will need to have the lights on in a room, then you can use the Game Boy Horror, I really love that, to track them to the furniture they hide in. Once they have been discovered, their energy must be drained bit by bit with the poltergust before you can suck them up. Each one has a pun for a name, because why not? And some are actually kind of funny. Boss ghosts have to be defeated in a more traditional arena fight. Luigi will still use the poltergust, but more to suck up things to fire at the boss ghosts at the right time. The only one this differs with is Boolossus, who you instead need to freeze each tiny boo and suck them up individually. These fights feel the most Super Mario Bros. In design and have a great amount of personality to them. You'll also have some secondary weapons to find and use with the poltergust with the three elements ice, water, and fire. Pretty obvious what they do. Fire lights things, ice freezes things, and water puts out fire. You'll need to use them to solve some of the mansion's puzzles and to fight certain ghosts. Luigi's Mansion was a charming tech demo for the GameCube, and it helps that it oozed with charm. A fan base quickly formed around it, and Luigi had more fans than ever. Graphically, it has some minor issues like the poltergust hose just clipping through everything, but mostly it was very polished and a treat to look at. A lot of the effects and things like the flashlight were very impressive in 2001. Every room, every ghost has a great personality on top of it. The game took a lot of inspiration from survival horror of the time, like the door opening transitions and the mansion design, but it had its own flair and all that Nintendo aesthetic. On top of that, the music was really well done. Some wonderfully orchestrated tunes, even if most of the time you heard Luigi humming or whistling that main tune. But you know that it worked. Even if you've never played the game, you can likely hum that music. Luigi's Mansion is a treasure and a wonderful launch title. It has had its naysayers since then, but it had a re-release on 3DS and 2 sequels. It is a series that has been doing well, and it all started on the Nintendo GameCube. Another title often included in those early promos was Rogue Leader, the sequel to Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64. There was a lot of buzz around this title, and it's well deserved. Once again developed by Factor 5 and LucasArts, it to this day remains a GameCube exclusive, unlike that original title. Rogue Leader, much like Rogue Squadron, is that Star Wars take on the dogfighting gameplay as you fly through space trying to take down the evil empire, but with things skewing to more of an arcade game and feel. This is far away from any kind of flight sim. Which is a good thing, to be honest, because Rogue Leader, while certainly not easy in difficulty, is super easy to pick up, play, and have a great time with it. The game covers the original trilogy timeline and has missions straight from the movies and little bits in between. Each one has you jumping into one of the classic ships such as the X-Wing or Y-Wing, and then you'll have to complete a certain chain of events, such as protecting a transport ship, destroying a base, or just surviving a certain event. While there is a training mode, the game really kicks off with the battle over the first Death Star. Not only appropriate, but also a great way to get people familiar with the game, as it has that wow factor. From that iconic scene being recreated in the engine of the game to the actual run to shoot the core of the Death Star, the level is impressive and you know you're in for a ride from here on out. The whole game is fantastic to look at and it runs wonderfully. It helps of course that a majority of levels take place in the dark space with just some twinkling stars in the back, but plenty of others have plenty of details and none of them are lacking in foot soldiers, ships, debris, and other world building items. While nothing new in 2001, the cockpit view is very detailed as well, and like I said, the cutscenes are great, recreating scenes from the films in-engine rather than using footage, though you do get to see some footage in various parts of the game. Music is of course good, not much to talk about there though, since it's all the usual Star Wars score, and I can't play a single bit of it, even in the background for fear of that Disney hammer. While the majority of controls are the same across the board, each ship does have its own way of doing a few things. Some, for example, have bombs you can drop, which shifts your camera perspective a bit, and others have missiles instead. Of course, some are just built differently, so they fly a bit differently. For example, the A-Wing is meant to be light and fast, so it controls as such, while the B-Wing has that weird folding thing, and that shifts how you aim and how flying feels, and it translates well during gameplay. If I had to give Rogue Leader one knock though, it would be how unbalanced it can feel on occasion. While I remember when I had the time to give nothing else attention, I slowly got better at the game and was able to get some better medals at the end, but I have absolutely no idea how to get gold in some of these missions. I can't even fathom it. Plus certain items like the targeting computer efficiency just make zero sense on what they want from me. But Rogue Leader is a wonderful game and it was a real fun experience at launch that is well worth playing today. You can even grab it for relatively cheap still, which is becoming more and more uncommon on the GameCube. Another notable title from that initial November 18th launch date was Super Monkey Ball. Originally developed on the Naomi arcade hardware with Sega, it was reworked a bit to launch on the GameCube since the Dreamcast was on the verge of failure during that development. Super Monkey Ball is basically a video game version of those labyrinth games every kid has unfortunately gotten for Christmas, but with cute monkeys, more than one game board, and all the Sega flair from that wonderful Dreamcast era. In Super Monkey Ball, you don't fully control the ball the monkey is hanging out in, you control the playfield by tilting the joystick, again, just like those labyrinth games. The game has you collecting bananas as well, because why wouldn't it? Which is also a sponsorship deal with Dole, and I love the complete lack of subtlety in that. Your goal is to get to the goalpost of each playfield and do so in the shortest amount of time. If you collect the most bananas, that is helpful as well. Overall, it's pure arcade action in its design approach. This is either the game you spend numerous hours with and learn every facet of it to ace each stage, or you enjoy it for its quick and accessible gameplay. At first, each stage is almost ridiculously easy, but it doesn't take long for the game to really ramp up, and some of them are just kind of ridiculous. I, for some reason, had a lot of trouble with this one stage. For some reason, that ball just liked to fly right off the stage in the last turn, and I almost felt like it was all luck when I finally got through it. But I've seen lots of people master this game, take shortcuts, and speedrun this game like it's nothing. So don't take my problem here as gospel. It controls well, and the game offers a good challenge for the majority of it. You also have mini games you can unlock with points you collect with each level completed. There isn't anything too special here, but great little distractions, especially the bowling. I wanted to like the Pilot Wing style target game, but I constantly felt like I had the right trajectory and height, but then I would just drop like a stone. Like I said, this game is dripping with that Sega charm that despite the Dreamcast failures, were moving some great and memorable titles at the time. You had your cute little monkey family that each had their own personality and characteristics, and there was this slightly trippy party-like atmosphere throughout the game. Just look at these silly monkeys partied up in these old diners floating in some sort of space-time thing. Graphically, it wasn't anything too special, and it didn't run in progressive scan, but it still had lots of style. The music is fantastic as well, catchy as it can be, and just downright fun. You're not going to be bored listening to it. These kinds of games are generally not my thing, but I can appreciate the things they do right that usually have you zone out, take a breath, and just experience a game for what it is. Or they're super frustrating and you're determined to complete it before you burn everything down. Whichever. All that said, it isn't a game I would suggest many people get for the GameCube. There have been numerous sequels, and from what I understand, some include a few stages from this initial game. On top of that, there is now the recent Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania, which remakes the original games into one collection with some new quality of life improvements and rebalancing. But if you want it on the GameCube as a collector, or just because you want to experience the original Vision with that original controller, it isn't expensive to track down. You know, there are several amazing games that came out from the initial November 18th or September 14th in Japan until Christmas that year. I could talk about them all, but some will have to wait for another time and another video. Pikmin was for the longest time that diamond in the rough that had a super unique concept at the time, all that Miyamoto charm, but several design choices that kept people from latching on in this first entry. It didn't hit store shelves until about a month later in both regions, December 3rd in the US, but was part of that initial E3 2001 reveal. It came out to critical acclaim and high sales, but quickly slumped, likely due to its oddball style and other choices in the market shortly after. But obviously, it formed a loyal fan base as it received a sequel and a re-release on the Wii, and eventually a third game on Wii U. In it, you play as Captain Olimar, and after your spaceship crashes on a strange planet, you have a set number of days to fix your ship and escape, or you die. That time limit on the game was my least favorite part when it first released. After discovering a cute species Olimar names Pikmin after a food on its home planet, these creatures seem attached to you and extra ready to do whatever you command. So of course, you take full advantage of this, start to cultivate more, and then command them to attack larger creatures and tear down obstacles in your way. It's a super fun game, with a few hiccups, and if you've never played Pikmin, I don't know if I would suggest you start with this one or not. I remember when I first got it, I was so blown away by the water effects, which probably seems silly today, but I'll always remember that. Of course, there is Super Smash Bros. Melee. I don't feel like I really need to talk about Smash Bros., and I hope you feel the same way, because I don't even know what I would say about it. This is the one that started the craze. The first on Nintendo 64 was fun, but that has nothing compared to Melee. I've tried the last 3 titles and none of them grabbed me like this one. Now I know that was a lot already for saying I don't know what I would say, but honestly, that about covers it. I don't feel like the right fan to properly go over it. That initial release was mostly single player for me, and I never cared about mechanics. It was all just about the bombastic fan service action, but I still love it and spent countless hours with it. There are also the multi-platform titles and the sports stuff that came out right around the launch. Not many of them are really worth mentioning in my mind, but you have stuff like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, which I spent a crazy amount of time with. I love this entry in the series, and the soundtrack still sticks with me. I skipped right over 4 and played this until Underground. Or you have the rough Batman Vengeance released by Ubisoft. I appreciate this game for what it tried to do, and basically being a proto-Arkham game, but based on the amazing Batman animated series. But boy, does this one have some major problems. The last title I do want to briefly talk about for launch day is Wave Race Blue Storm, another sequel to a title on the Nintendo 64. It may not be my favorite style of game, but the legacy and transition from Nintendo 64 to GameCube is an interesting one. The first Wave Race was released on the Game Boy in 1992, developed by Nintendo EAD, and in 1996 it was followed up by the more well-known Wave Race 64 as a launch title for the Nintendo 64. Once again developed by Nintendo EAD, it received critical acclaim and has continued to be a favorite on the system. A Wave Race sequel probably just made sense to launch with the system. It is able to connect to the previous system like Rogue Leader, and that keeps things feeling similar in a reassuring way while also showing off a direct comparison to the capabilities of the new hardware when compared to something only 5 years earlier. Non-traditional or extreme sports were also very popular at the time, fitting in well with the Tony Hawk, Dave Mirra's, snowboarding games, and the like. In Wave Race Blue Storm, you race, if that wasn't obvious, using jet skis through what kind of amounts to obstacle courses. Unlike something like Mario Kart or even any arcade racer, you don't just barrel down the water channel with the direct goal of getting in first. You also need to weave your way around markers and on the correct side of each. You can do some tricks in order to rack up points and boosts, but other than that, it is a pretty straightforward racer. You mostly just want to focus on hitting the right jumps and taking the right shortcuts in order to come in first. But weather will play a big role in how well you may or may not do in a race, and they don't mess around. You don't just have some light rain, and for some reason some race organizer thought it was a good idea to continue on in basically a monsoon for some of these levels. The water can get super choppy, and it's difficult to control your jet ski. If it isn't smooth water, I tend to find myself randomly losing control and crashing into something. Of course, there is a wide variety of racers to choose from that all have their own special stats and jet ski. But like a lot of the arcade or kart racers, it can be hard to distinguish the difference until you spend a lot of time with the game, and even then, it can be questionable if that higher control stat really does anything. Wave Race Blue Storm is a fun game and a great tech demo for the launch of the system. It shows off some great rendering effects, wonderful sound design, and had that legacy to grab the attention of longtime fans. But I personally find it a bit shallow, and the difficulty balancing doesn't feel exactly right, and the controls can be a bit sloppy, especially when the water gets choppy. But it's great for that quick gaming session and has plenty to like about it. Well, I wouldn't tell you to go out of your way to grab it if you've never played it. If you see it though, you might as well grab it. So that launch 20 years ago actually went really well, selling a ton of consoles. Luigi's Mansion also sold more units than Super Mario 64 at launch. So it didn't seem like the criticisms toward Nintendo was going to hold back the system. But sadly, things didn't last long. The GameCube came in behind the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 in sales. The usual discussion is around the smaller disc size that kept some third-party developers from latching on with bigger titles, and the sales declining kept the rest from having many exclusives on the system. The lack of a DVD drive didn't help either, which is a sad fact, and when you don't get the landscape-changing titles like GTA 3, it can only do so well. In the end, it didn't even do better than the Nintendo 64 in sales. But hey, it gave us a lot of cool stuff to gaming over its lifespan and beyond. One fantastic controller design and the best wireless controller at that point. You have to love the Game Boy Player, of course. I still use mine to this day, and the connectivity of the actual Game Boy Advance was also a great concept. Plus, several series of games continued here, started here, or finally found their footing. The game library is very impressive for its moderate size. Plus, the GameCube would essentially give us the Wii, and of course the Wii would keep GameCube software as backward compatible. Nintendo tried to swing for the fences with tech, and it didn't really work out for them, so they took the faults and experimentation of the GameCube to form the Wii. Say what you want about it, Nintendo had a major win focusing on accessibility and gameplay over anything else. The GameCube has a fan base that almost seems as strong as ever, with plenty of indie and mod development to improve its hardware, software, and how it can be played on modern TVs. The games themselves, once a bargain to fill holes in your Wii collection and then just for some nostalgia, have begun to really become coveted by collectors and gamers. Well, that's all for me and the launch and a bit of legacy on the GameCube after 20 years. Let me know in the comments what your memories of the GameCube are, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Ring that bell and all that. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.